The moment she laughed, the whole bar turned quiet. A powerful CEO in a black dress, mocking the grease-stained single dad sitting beside her. But what she didn't know was that this stranger's next decision would turn her world upside down. What could possibly happen between two people who should have never met? Stay with us, and if you believe that one small moment can change everything, this story is for you. Seattle wore the rain like a confession that night. Soft, persistent, and oddly intimate. A silver veil that turned the side street neon into watercolor. Inside the Copper Finch, a narrow neighborhood bar with good wood and better jazz, the lamps cast small halos on the polished counter, and the bartender, a woman with a forearm of fading sailor tattoos, hummed along to a muted trumpet. Ethan Cole slid onto an end stool, the one near the coat hooks and the napkin dispenser, the one that let him see the door without being seen too much himself. He was 38, grease still living in the half-moons of his nails, no matter how hard he scrubbed. A mechanical engineer whose last contract had evaporated when the company shuttered its small division and sent everyone to pursue other opportunities. He called it what it was to his 8-year-old daughter. A pause, not a failure. He had promised Lily pancakes on Saturday, the good kind with the crispy edges, promised he would read the chapter with the brave fox twice, promised he would show up to the science fair with the little wind turbine they built from junkyard spoons. Promises were a man's scaffolding when paychecks weren't. He ordered club soda with lime, because rent was a number and so was dignity, and tonight he could only afford one of them. He checked his phone. A photo of Lily in oversized safety goggles, tongue peeking out in concentration, captioned in his own dry humor, Chief Engineer, R&D, Bedtime Division. The door opened, and a gust carried in rain and the rustle of silk. She stood there a second too long, like someone translating a language only she could hear. Black dress that didn't blink at the price tag, hair twisted up and stabbed with a pin that caught the light. A small clamshell clutch held like a secret. She took the empty seat beside him, because the rest of the bar was full of the easy laughter of couples and coworkers, and because loneliness, when it is honest, prefers the edges. The bartender approached. The woman said, "Scotch, neat," a heartbeat late, and her voice landed like glass set gently on stone. Ethan didn't look at her at first. He had learned since the hospital years ago, and the quiet widening after, that some people needed silence more than company. The trumpet threaded the air like an apology. She sipped and winced and didn't hide it. Up close, the facade frayed. A faint tremor in the fingers. Mascara that had survived cameras but not weather. The pale mark on her collarbone, where a necklace had recently been and wasn't. He saw it all in the corner of his sight, the way a mechanic listens to an engine. Tone first, then parts. "Long night," Ethan said, "because sometimes a bridge begins with 2 planks. "Long month," she answered, and the tired humor in it made him turn. Her eyes were the particular blue of winter mornings, the kind that promises light but not warmth. He lifted his glass. "Club soda. Don't let the bubbles fool you." It teased a smile to the edge of her mouth, the first honest movement since she'd stepped in. "Victoria," she said after a pause, and it hung there. One of those names that fit anywhere from a boardroom to a ballet program. She didn't offer a last name, and he didn't ask. "Ethan," he replied. "I used to make broken things work. Tonight I'm between projects." "Aren't we all?" she said, and this time the smile held. The bartender drifted away, reading the room with the mercy of someone who'd lived a little. A pair of men in suits at the far table argued softly about a merger. A 20-something laughed too loud at a story she'd tell differently in a year. Outside, a bus hissed and shuddered to a stop. "To making things work," Victoria said, the toast small and private. She raised the scotch again. and he watched the way her shoulders moved, the micro flinch, as if bracing for the warmth to do what it promised and failing anyway. He set his club soda down, turned just enough to face her without crowding. "You don't need another drink. You need someone to listen." It was not a line. It was a diagnosis. She blinked. Her throat worked like she'd swallowed a yes and found a maybe. Then words came. The gala that had felt like a trial. The polite daggers of shareholders. A press photo where her smile looked like a borrowed dress. A friend who wasn't. A brother she missed most when the rooms got big. She did not say CEO. She didn't have to. Power leaves fingerprints in the posture, in how people measure their pauses. Ethan listened the way mechanics listen, patient, unsentimental, hunting for the true rattle beneath the dashboard chatter. When she trailed off, he offered no advice, only a story about the small victories that keep men upright. How Lily had finally tied her shoes like a sailor's knot and saluted afterward. How the wind turbine squealed on the first try and sang on the second. How grief had taught him to keep a list of things that still worked. Kettles, hinges, second chances. "Second chances," Victoria repeated, and her voice made the words sound expensive. She looked at the rain stitched across the window. "Do they come on time?" "Never," he said, "but sometimes they arrive exactly when we're willing to open the door." Her laugh was quieter than the jazz, which is to say it was true. A notification lit her phone. A name she silenced so fast it looked like muscle memory. "I should go," she said, gathering herself. And in the gathering, she rebuilt all the careful scaffolds, shoulders squared, chin set, the public armor sliding back into place. She reached into the clamshell clutch, hesitated, and then slipped a card onto the bar between the coasters. "In case you ever want to talk about making things work," she said, eyes on him but meaning something wider. When he glanced down, a couple jostled behind them, laughter bumping his elbow, and a napkin slid over the card like a curtain. By the time he brushed it aside, she was already a dark parabola in the door's glass, rain rounding her edges. He watched her cross the sidewalk, head uncovered, as if rain could baptize the night back into mercy. He finished his club soda and left a couple of coins anyway. Later, shrugging into his jacket, he felt a weight in the lining he didn't remember. The napkin, folded, with the card tucked neatly inside. He didn't see it. Not yet. He stepped out into the clean cold and thought of pancakes, and of how empty seats sometimes aren't empty at all, just waiting. Morning came with the thin light that only Seattle knows, gray, soft, and undecided. Ethan woke to the sound of a small voice humming in the kitchen. Lily stood on a stool, flipping pancakes with a seriousness that made him smile. "You said crispy edges, Dad," she said without turning, her dark curls escaping from a messy ponytail. "Mission accomplished." He laughed, kissed her hair, and poured coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Engineer." For a few minutes, it was easy to forget the weight of bills and rejection letters. When he reached into the jacket he'd worn the night before, searching for a wrench receipt, his fingers brushed something stiff, a napkin folded around a card. He unfolded it and froze. Victoria Hale, CEO, Hale Robotics. The name looked too expensive for his kitchen table. He remembered her face at the bar, the tired grace, the tremor when she lifted her glass, and suddenly felt foolish. What was he supposed to do with this? Call her? For what? Advice on how to lose your job gracefully? He slipped the card back into his wallet, next to Lily's photo, and decided to let it rest. Lily noticed the faraway look. "You thinking about Mom again?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head and forced a smile. "Just engines and breakfast." She nodded, accepting it the way children do when they've already learned some questions have no safe answers. When he dropped her off at school, she handed him a folded paper. "Don't peek until later," she warned. He promised. Across town, in the mirrored stillness of Hale Robotics' penthouse office, Victoria Hale sat behind a glass desk that reflected a woman she barely recognized. Last night's rain still echoed somewhere in her chest. The morning meeting had been brutal, investors pressing for layoffs, her CFO hinting at restructuring, and a tabloid headline about her emotional instability trending on a business blog. She'd built an empire from precision and predictability. Yet the only thing that had felt real in weeks was the stranger at the bar who offered no agenda. She opened her planner and found a damp ring where her glass had sat, faint but stubborn, and thought of his words. "You don't need another drink. You need someone to listen." It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over her assistant's number, then put it down. There were mergers to save, rumors to manage, and a board meeting that felt like a firing squad. Still, a quiet pulse of curiosity wouldn't leave her. Who was Ethan, really? That afternoon, Ethan stood in line at a job fair downtown, one of those echoing halls that smell of coffee and defeat. Dozens of men and women clutched resumes like lifelines. His turn came. A recruiter skimmed his papers and smiled politely. "Impressive background, Mr. Cole. Unfortunately, we're looking for candidates with more recent automation experience." He nodded, thanked her, and walked out into the drizzle. In the parking lot, he opened Lily's folded paper. Inside was a crayon drawing. A woman standing under an umbrella of blue scribbles, her eyes closed but smiling. Below it, in careful letters, "Woman under the rain." "She looks like someone who forgot how to smile," Lily had told him that morning. Ethan stared at it, the ache behind his ribs tightening. Somehow his daughter had captured Victoria's expression without ever seeing her. He tucked the drawing beside the business card, a pairing that made no logical sense but felt inevitable. Meanwhile, Victoria sat in her office surrounded by glass and noise, her inbox filling with corporate fires. Her assistant, Andrew, hesitated in the doorway. "Ma'am, about the investor dinner tonight. Cancel it," she said, surprising herself, "and reschedule the press call." "Should I ask why?" Andrew ventured. "No," she said quietly, "but book me a car. To Pine Street, the Copper Finch." That evening, Ethan stopped by the same bar again, not for company, but to gather the courage to face another day. The bartender smiled. "Back so soon?" "Just waiting out the rain," he said, taking the same seat. He was reviewing job listings on his phone when the door opened and the world seemed to repeat itself. Rain, silk, a hesitation. Victoria stepped in, same bar, same stool, but something in her eyes had changed. Less armor, more question. For a heartbeat, they just looked at each other, both surprised, both pretending not to be. "Guess we both had long months," he said, half grinning. "Or maybe the universe just ran out of bars," she replied. She ordered tea this time. When the bartender raised an eyebrow, she said, "I'm trying to make things work." The words made Ethan's chest tighten. The hum of conversation filled the air, but between them, silence felt like understanding. He wanted to tell her about Lily's drawing, about how a little girl he'd never mentioned had somehow captured her sadness. But he didn't. Some truths needed time. The bar lights softened around them, turning strangers into almost friends. Victoria looked at the rain outside, then back at him. "Do you ever get the feeling that certain people show up right when you need them?" Ethan smiled, tired but kind. "All the time. I just never realize it until they're gone." The second night at the Copper Finch felt quieter, as if the rain itself was listening. Victoria's coat was still damp at the shoulders when she sat down beside Ethan. For a while, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of citrus and varnish, the kind of scent that makes you believe something good might start if you don't rush it. "Tea?" Ethan asked, nodding at her cup. "Trying to stay awake," she said. "It's been a long week." "You said that last time," he replied. "Then it must have been a long life," she murmured, and the joke almost landed. When their eyes met, something eased. This time there were no walls made of small talk. "How's your daughter?" she asked, surprising him. "You never mentioned her," he said, brows rising. "You wear the look," she said simply. "People who love like that. It doesn't wash off." He smiled, half embarrassed. "Lily's 8. She thinks she's 25. She draws things she shouldn't understand." "Like what?" Victoria leaned in slightly, genuinely curious. He hesitated, then took out the folded paper from his wallet, the drawing of the woman under the rain. Her eyes widened. "That's—" She stopped, the rest of the sentence lost between shock and tenderness. "She said it looked like someone who forgot how to smile," Ethan said. "She's usually right about people." Victoria studied the crayon lines like scripture. "Maybe I did forget," she whispered. They talked for hours. He told her about losing his wife, about the hospital's mistake, the late-night shifts that followed, the broken washing machine he fixed because he couldn't fix grief. Victoria listened, her expression raw. "I lost my brother," she said quietly. "He died in a prototype accident 3 years ago. I built an empire to make sense of it, but the bigger the company got, the smaller I became." Her voice trembled. "Sometimes I feel like I built a monument to guilt." Ethan's throat tightened. "Guilt's heavy metal," he said. "You can shape it into armor or melt it down into something useful. Depends what you do next." A flash of thunder rolled outside, as if punctuating the thought. She smiled faintly. "You should give TED Talks." "Only if they come with free pancakes," he said. And she laughed for real this time, an unguarded sound that felt like light in a window you thought was abandoned. For a moment, they weren't a CEO and a man between jobs, just two people carrying different kinds of missing. Then the world shifted. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and went pale. Ethan caught the logo on the screen. Hale Robotics Board Meeting Update. She tried to tuck it away, but he had already seen the name. "You work for Hale Robotics," he said slowly. "Work for?" she repeated, then exhaled. "I am Hale Robotics." The words hit him harder than he expected. His mind flicked to the closure notice 2 years ago. The small division scrapped to reduce redundancy. The engineers let go with polite form letters. His own team. "You're the reason I lost my job," he said, the realization sharp enough to draw blood. Victoria blinked. What do you mean?" "You bought out Garrison Tech, promised to keep the staff, then shut it down in a quarter." His voice was quiet, but every word landed. "That was my crew. My project. We built the early prototypes your company patents now." The air between them thickened. "I didn't know," she said, her tone cracking. "I didn't make that call. It was—" "Your name's on the letterhead," he cut in. "Doesn't matter who signed it." He rose, pushing back the stool. For the first time she saw him angry. Not loud, not cruel, just profoundly hurt. "You build machines," he said. "I build hope. Maybe that's why we don't speak the same language." He dropped a couple of bills on the counter, though his drink was untouched, nodded once to the bartender, and turned for the door. Victoria sat frozen, heart pounding, a taste like iron in her mouth. Outside, the rain was relentless, washing color from the world. She wanted to call out, but shame pinned her still. In her mind, she replayed his words, "I build hope." It had been years since anyone had spoken to her without fear or flattery. The door closed, the bell above it soft as regret. Later that night, she sat in her car, engine off, listening to the rain on the roof. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47. The business card she'd given him sat in her lap, folded, the ink smudged by her thumb. She thought about his daughter's drawing, about the look in his eyes when she said her brother's name. Something inside her shifted. Not the sudden clarity of movies, but the slow cracking of ice that means spring is coming. You don't need another drink, he had said. Maybe he was right again. She started the car, turned toward the industrial district where the old Garrison Tech warehouse still stood. Now a forgotten storage wing, with her company's logo half torn from the wall. She didn't know why she was going there, only that she had to see the ghosts herself. Back at home, Ethan tucked Lily in, the drawing still on the nightstand. She stirred and murmured, "Is the lady still sad?" He brushed her hair from her forehead. "Maybe not forever," he said. Outside, thunder faded into the distance. The rain stopped 2 nights later, leaving the city slick and silver. Victoria drove alone through the industrial district, the wipers whispering across the glass. She had spent the day buried in meetings, but her mind hadn't been in the boardroom. Every time someone said quarterly loss or automation strategy, she heard Ethan's voice. "You build machines, I build hope." It wasn't accusation anymore. It was revelation. She wanted to understand what he had meant. To see the place where her company's decisions had burned real lives. The Garrison Tech plant sat behind chain-link fences and broken floodlights, a ghost of progress. She parked near the gate, stepping out into the chill air. The warehouse still bore the faint outline of the old logo beneath Hale Robotics' gleaming plate. She walked inside, heels echoing against the concrete, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. Somewhere in the rafters, a loose sheet of metal rattled in the wind. She found herself standing before an old prototype assembly line, half dismantled, half forgotten. "So this is where we saved money," she murmured. At that moment, in a small garage a mile away, Ethan was finishing a brake job for a neighbor when he noticed the sirens. Red light flickered against the windows, followed by the unmistakable scent of burning plastic. The smoke column rose from the direction of the industrial district. He turned to the mechanic next to him. "That's near the old Garrison plant, right?" The man nodded. "They've been doing storage work there. You think—" But Ethan was already grabbing his jacket. "My kid's staying with a friend tonight. I'll check it out." By the time he reached the warehouse, the scene was chaos. Fire trucks lined the street, hoses hissing steam across the asphalt. Flames licked through the broken windows, painting the sky orange. A security guard shouted about someone trapped inside. "A woman," he stammered. "She went in about 10 minutes ago. Said she was from Hale Robotics." Ethan's blood ran cold. Without thinking, he snatched a soaked jacket from the ground, tied it across his face, and pushed past the barrier tape. Inside, heat roared like an engine without restraint. The smoke was thick enough to bite. He called out, his voice swallowed by crackling beams. Then, faintly, he heard it, a cough, followed by a weak cry. "Victoria!" he shouted, moving toward the sound. He found her near a collapsed workstation, half conscious, a beam fallen across her leg. The firelight carved her face into something both fragile and defiant. "Ethan?" she croaked. "What are you—" "Saving you, apparently," he said, grimacing as he lifted the beam. "You should have stayed home." She tried to laugh, coughed instead. "Guess I build disasters too." "Not tonight," he said. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and half carried her toward the door. The ceiling groaned. A burst of flame blocked their path, forcing them to detour through a maze of metal crates. When her strength failed, he lifted her fully, the way he once lifted Lily after nightmares. Outside, firefighters shouted directions, but the smoke turned everything into shapes. He could barely see the exit sign when a girder gave way behind them, throwing sparks like fireworks. He shielded her with his body and ran through the smoke until cool air hit his face. The crowd surged forward as he stumbled out, still holding her. Paramedics caught them both. Someone shouted for oxygen masks. Ethan collapsed to one knee, coughing, but refused to let go of her hand. "She's breathing," a medic said, checking her pulse. "He's burned on the arm." As they loaded Victoria onto a stretcher, she reached weakly for him. "You came back," she whispered through the mask. He managed a rough smile. "Couldn't let the lady under the rain turn into smoke." Hours later, the hospital lights hummed softly. Victoria woke to the rhythmic beep of a monitor. Her first sight was a small figure asleep in a chair. Lily, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. A nurse whispered. She insisted on waiting. Her dad's in recovery next door. Tears blurred Victoria's vision. She turned her head and saw Ethan through the glass partition, his arm bandaged, chest rising steady. She pressed her palm to the glass. "You saved me twice," she said quietly. "Once from fire, once from myself." When he woke, she was sitting by his bed, hair loose, face bare of the armor she used to wear. "You're a terrible employee," he rasped. "Always showing up where the boss tells you not to." She smiled through tears. "Maybe it's time I stopped being the boss." He frowned, confused, but she went on. "I've spent years building machines that replace people. You reminded me what people can still build. Kindness, trust, hope. I can't keep running a company that forgets that." He squeezed her fingers. "You don't have to destroy it," he said. "Just rebuild it right." Outside the window, the first light of dawn touched the skyline. Somewhere down the hall, Lily's laughter drifted in. Light, certain, alive. Victoria closed her eyes, the sound filling the spaces the fire had cleared. Spring arrived in Seattle the way forgiveness does. Quietly at first, then all at once. The cherry trees along Pine Street shook out their pink handkerchiefs. Rain softened to a polite mist, and the copper finch switched its menu from stews to salads as if the city had exhaled. In the weeks after the fire, everything that had been rigid in Victoria seemed to loosen by design. She called an emergency board meeting and, to the astonishment of every shareholder, announced a restructuring that placed people at the center of the blueprint. The plan was specific and public. Halt non-essential layoffs. Spin up a retraining initiative for technicians displaced by automation. End the practice of buying companies only to cannibalize their staff. Most startling was the creation of a new, independent nonprofit funded by her own shares, the Cole Foundation, dedicated to bridging workers into modern roles and offering grants to single-parent families navigating the turbulence of lost income. "We built systems so efficient," she said into a sea of cameras, "that we forgot what we were supposed to be efficient for. The Cole Foundation will help us remember." The video went viral, not because of polish, but because her voice shook and she didn't edit the tremble out. Ethan watched the clip on a borrowed tablet at the neighborhood garage, arm still wrapped in a light compress beneath his sleeve, pride settling in his chest like a steady weight. He had declined a salaried position at Hale Robotics. Too many meetings, too little grease, but accepted a different ask. Become the Foundation's hands-on technical advisor, the person who could translate between spreadsheets and shop floors. "I'll keep my little bay," he told Victoria, waving at the roll-up door where sunlight drew a neat rectangle on the concrete. "People know where to find me." "Good," she said. "So do I." On a mild Saturday, Lily marched into their apartment, cheeks wind-pinked, and presented Victoria with a new drawing. Gone were the blue scribbles and closed eyes. This time the woman stood beneath the sun like a gold coin, face lifted, hair loose, a tiny flower pushing up through a crack at her feet. In careful, proud letters, Lily had titled it, "Woman Under the Sun." Victoria stared, then knelt so her eyes met the child's. "May I keep this?" "It's yours," Lily said. "We're making a wall at the center. Soon. Dad says walls should hold hope." The center. That was the other project, the one that made the city feel smaller in the right way. In a renovated wing of the old Garrison Tech plant, the part the fire had spared and the lawyers had surrendered, Victoria and Ethan opened a community workshop where people carried in broken things and left with something more than fixed. They called it the Finch Works, a nod to the bar where a quiet conversation had first unclenched the future. On the left, a bright classroom where Victoria taught robotics in sleeves rolled past her elbows, bracelets clicking as she gestured. Whiteboard crowded with diagrams that somehow made sense to a teenager who'd once believed math was a door with no handle. On the right, a humming shop where Ethan ran Intro to Mechanics, the kind of lessons that use toaster ovens and old bike chains to explain torque and thermals, the kind of lessons that leave adults grinning because their hands remember learning as joy. Between the two rooms stood Lily's corner, a row of steel planter boxes made from repurposed machine guards, dirt warmed by grow lights. She showed children how to coax basil from tired soil, how to touch a leaf and read its thirst, how a seed becomes a small yes that turns into a salad. Green engineering, she declared, a foreman with pigtails. On opening day, neighbors milled beneath pennant strings, reporters took notes, and a retired machinist cried into a paper napkin for reasons he couldn't explain. Ethan took the mic just long enough to say what he believed. "We're not replacing anyone here," he said. "We're repairing." He glanced toward Victoria, who was laughing with a woman in a cafeteria apron while measuring the wrist for a 3D printed brace. In that instant, she looked unarmored and precisely herself. A person rebuilt not by apology, but by use, weeks folded into habit. Ethan split his time between paid repairs that kept the lights honest and volunteer hours that kept his heart honest. Victoria met with the foundation's caseworkers in the mornings, then rolled up her sleeves in the afternoons, sleeves smudged, smile uncurated. Andrew, once the gatekeeper of her calendar, now spent Mondays and Thursdays at Finch Works teaching a beginner's class on soldering. At night, when the city settled into a hush that felt earned, Ethan and Victoria sometimes took the long way home, detouring past the Copper Finch. They'd stand under the awning that had once framed a cautionary distance and sip takeout tea, watching the same neon promise something small and good. "Funny how everything started with an empty seat at a bar," she said one evening, voice warm as the paper cup. "Maybe it wasn't empty," he answered. "Maybe it was waiting." She considered that, then slipped her hand into his without ceremony, the way people do when they are done auditioning. "Thank you for coming back for me," she said, meaning more than the fire. "Thank you for letting me," he said, meaning more than permission. Back at the shop, Lily had left a note taped crookedly to the door. "Closed for family dinner. Back tomorrow with cookies." They ate at the little table by the window. Pasta, a salad that tasted like their improbable garden, laughter that sounded expensive and wasn't. After dishes, Lily declared a rule change. "New house policy. We tell the truth even when it's loud," she announced, climbing into Ethan's lap. "Also, bedtime stories must include at least one robot and one wrench." Victoria saluted. "Copy that, Chief Engineer." Later, with Lily asleep and the apartment wrapped in the kind of silence that means safety, Ethan turned to Victoria. "How's the sun?" he asked, nodding toward the drawing on the wall. "Still up," she said. "Some clouds, but I know where to stand now." He kissed her forehead, then her mouth, a promise less like thunder and more like weather, something you live by without checking the forecast. Outside, a light rain began and nobody hurried. Inside, the kettle clicked off and the future kept boiling gently, the way second chances do when they're finally put to work. Sometimes the people we meet by accident are the ones sent to repair what life has broken. For Victoria, it wasn't a bar, a company, or even a fire that changed everything. It was a man who listened when no one else did, and a little girl who reminded her how to smile again. In the end, love didn't look like wealth or power. It looked like pancakes, laughter, and a home built on second chances. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes that kindness can rewrite a life. And don't forget to stay with us for more soul-stirring tales.